Chapter 31 and the final chapter of the Shadows of Doom. Grandma Sylvie trod on the patch of soot where the bag had once been. Well, that's ruined one of Amos's theories. The great uncommon good can be destroyed. Obviously. She sighed and pulled Ivy and Seb toward her in a hug. Are you two okay? Some of the other traders have gone to free the underguards, Ethel said, approaching them. Ivy saw a stream of uncommoners cautiously leaving the tent, still clutching one another tightly and glancing around. Ethel ruffled a hand through Ivy's hair. Well done, kid. That move with the yo-yo really got those beasts disoriented. Shame about the bag. Ivy couldn't believe it. One of the great uncommon good. Gone forever. There were only 4 left now. I know, it's okay. So rainstorm here, which scares our cat. But I think it's a nice time when it's rainy to read or listen to a story. It's okay. One of the great uncommon good is gone forever. There were only 4 left now. From over by the big top, they heard a cry. Alexander was being wrestled away from Mr. Punch. His uncommon bubble wand had been taken off him. I'm sorry about your father, Alexander, Mr. Punch said sincerely. As he bowed his head, Ivy noticed that he was switching between the red-bearded ringmaster and the bespectacled gray-haired shop assistant. Get off me, Alexander roared, struggling to break free. This is all your fault. Then he pointed to Ivy and Seb. And yours. You did this. All of you. You killed my pa. There was so much pain in his voice. After everything he'd done, Ivy still felt sorry for him. Valiant and Judy came running across the grass. The crowd emerging from the big top fell silent. Ivy noticed it parting, and into the gap strode Selena. A chill went down Ivy's spine. Stay close, Grandma Sylvie said. This isn't over yet. Traitors of Londonor, Selena called, her voice as majestic as always. I'm afraid I have some troubling news. She turned in a circle, catching the gaze of every traitor. Her gray dress rippled like water. This boy is not the true criminal among us, nor the true mastermind behind the Pyroach attack. She swept toward Alexander and laid a hand on his shoulder. The burly gentleman who had been restraining him simply let go. Alexander looked as if he didn't know whether he should make a run for it or wait to see if Selena revealed any more. He hesitated. No need to fear, Alexander, Selena told him softly. Just cooperate, and I can reveal who is really behind this. Ivy studied her closely. There was a stiffness to her movements, as if she was trying very hard to remain calm. Many of you may have noticed that I left the stadium earlier than planned, Selena continued, raising her voice. This was because, shortly before the Grivens contest began, I received new evidence relating to a theft that I suffered many years ago. A powerful, uncommon object was stolen from me, an item that would be dangerous in the wrong hands. Amos's journal, Ivy thought. That was what Selena was referring to. She considered the information it contained. All the secrets Amos had discovered about the Dirge and Selena's involvement with them. Perhaps it wasn't Amos Sterling whom Selena wanted destroyed in those archive photos. Perhaps it was his journal. I tracked down the object, Selena continued, and found the thief. Her head snapped around and she pointed a bony gloved finger at Ivy. It was none other than your Grivens champion, Ivy Sparrow. People started murmuring. Ivy saw frowning faces and shaking heads. A few were counting on fingers, trying to work out if Ivy was even old enough to be Selena's thief. Alexander gave a smug smile but remained silent. Ivy folded her arms. Seb shifted his weight beside her, about to step to her defense. But someone much more unexpected got there first. Lady Grimes, a voice called, so cold and sharp it sliced through the air. The throng parted for Inspector Smokeheart. His uniform was shredded and scorched, and ash dusted his slick black hair. Is this the item you're referring to? In his gloved hand he was shaking Amos's journal. Ivy nudged Grandma Sylvie. That's where you sent it in the sack of stars? To Smokeheart? A wicked smile crept onto Grandma Sylvie's lips. Inspector, that's it, Selina cried, marching toward him. She reached for the journal, but Smokeheart quickly withdrew it. I've just conducted a very interesting interview with Jack in the Green, he said. He told us that he is an employee of yours. Smokeheart must have been questioning Jack in the Green since his arrest at the Grivens contest. Their arrangement can't have been that solid if he was willing to expose Selina. She laughed. Jack in the Green, have you quite lost your senses, Inspector? Smokeheart rapped his fingers on the journal. And then there was this notebook that appeared in my hands. We have a resident forensic mixologist expert at the station. He only managed to decipher a few pages, but that was all I needed. Selina's face twitched. She reached for the journal again. This time, Smokeheart grabbed her wrist with his free hand and tugged off her glove. The crowd gasped. The skin on Selina's hand was yellow with pus and writhing with maggots. All these years, Smokeheart growled, his dark glasses fixing on her rotting fingers. Every order you gave me, every decision you made. You were never working for the uncommoners of Londonor, were you? You were never working on this side of the law. All the traders fell utterly silent. Ivy beamed at Grandma Sylvie. She must have known that sending Smokeheart the journal would have been enough to put Selina's true allegiance in doubt. Selina dragged her glove back on. Inspector, she cried. Are you quite well? You're not making sense. Selina looked over his shoulder at the troop of underguards. Guards, escort the inspector to the infirmary immediately. I fear he may be suffering from the pyrote attack. She made another dive for Amos's journal, but Smokeheart threw the notebook to the nearest officer, who neatly caught it and stood there waiting. None of the other underguards moved. Smokeheart drew his toilet brush from beneath his cloak. Lady Selina Grimes, I'm arresting you for being a member of a band guild and for perpetrating murder, corruption, and the betrayal of your fellow uncommoners in service of that guild. You do not have to say anything, but anything you do say may be used against you in a court of GUT law. Selina leaped back, her body tensed as if she was about to pounce. She slid her ebony cane out of the folds of her silk dress and jabbed it in Smokeheart's direction, sending thorns splaying through the air towards him. He parried the strike with his toilet brush, frying the plants with charged blasts. Amidst the commotion, Ivy spotted Alexander slipping away. He's escaping, she shouted. But the fight between Selina and Smokeheart had everyone rapt, and no one listened. Seb went up on tiptoe to peer over people's hats. He's going that way. Seb grabbed the sleeve of Ivy's tunic and pulled her through the crowd onto the gauntlet. Alexander had disappeared behind a hedgerow, along with someone in a long black cloak. Ivy and Seb crept after them and stopped at the corner of a cottage. Alexander and the stranger were talking. You have proved beyond any doubt that you are capable of great things, said the stranger in a hoarse voice.
The rest of Adam are fools not to accept you.
There was a sigh before Alexander replied. And who are you? The Rasivatum are quite brilliant, the stranger replied, but they will never be great. There is only one truly great guild. The back of Ivy's neck prickled. That hoarse voice sounded strangely familiar. You're from the Dirge? Alexander asked. Amos's light print. That's where Ivy had heard that voice before. The speaker was the same monkshood she'd listened to in 1967. A boy like you could easily win a place with us someday, Monkshood said. You have already demonstrated rare talents, and now I believe you have something that could prove even more valuable. The journal, Alexander said gruffly. You want me to tell you what I read inside it, don't you? Ivy covered her mouth. Alexander hadn't hidden Amos's journal to protect her at all. He'd taken it to read what was inside. His curiosity had probably been pricked when he saw the smoking hourglass. A loud boom shook the air. Ivy saw a flash of blue light over by the big top. Grandma Sylvie and Valian. She turned to leave, but then listened for Alexander and Monkshood again. They had already disappeared. Let's go, she said urgently. Seb hesitated for only a moment before sprinting back through the crowd and skidding to a halt on the other side. Selena was holding Valian around the chest, her uncommon cane pointing at his neck. Its thorny brambles tightened around his throat. Stay back, she spat, her voice full of venom. Let me through. As she edged toward the gauntlet, people hurried out of her path. Ivy tried to catch Valian's eye, but there were too many people around. Smokeheart, his uncommon toilet brush sparkling in his hands, stepped toward Selena carefully. There is nowhere to go, Lady Grimes. No walls to walk through here. It's just a one-way ticket to a ghoul hole for you. Never, Selena cried, jerking the cane. Valian tensed. Ivy could see blood dripping down his neck. Mr. Punch stepped forward. There is another solution to this, Inspector, he said wearily, inching towards Selena. One where no one gets hurt. His blue-green eyes picked out Ivy. She wondered what he was going to do. From under his ringmaster's coat, he brought out a chestnut-brown violin. Ivy could sense it was uncommon. She listened closely. The voice inside the violin was screaming and sobbing in alternate beats, just like the voice that floated inside Selena. They sounded as if they were crying out to each other, as if they had desperately wanted to be reunited, like two halves of the same coin. It was the violin, the one Selena had given Monkshood in 1967. It contained the other half of her soul. Mr. Punch took a deep sigh. Be at peace, Selena Grimes. He gently tossed the violin at her. It tumbled through the air, then suddenly sped toward her like an arrow. Both she and the violin exploded in a great burst of light. As Ivy shielded her eyes from the blast, she sensed a voice dancing at the edge of her hearing. She couldn't be sure, but she felt, just for a second, that the voice belonged to Selena, a complete Selena. Oh, I was mistaken. Chapter 32. Let's continue. The steps of the great cavern memorial were covered with bunches of daffodils. Ivy saw uncommon ribbons writing messages of condolences through the blooms. Some of them spoke of the tragic loss of Drummond Brewster or the casualties of the Pyroach attack, while others commemorated past victims of the dirge. Ivy shivered. Up until a few days ago, she'd never seen anyone die. Now she'd witnessed not only Drummond Brewster's passing, but also the departure of Selena Grimes. They got the graffiti off then, Seb said, staring at the empty space, which had only recently been covered in garish purple paint. Ivy assumed Mr. Punch had something to do with it. If anyone was able to undo Alexander Brewster's handiwork, it would be a member of the Rasa Vedum. Valian scanned the shell-shocked faces of the traders. People were muttering, their arms around each other's shoulders. Everyone feels guilty that they didn't realize who Selena Grimes really was, that they let her control them for so long. Ivy sighed in understanding. She still couldn't believe the scale of Alexander's deception. She was angry with herself for not seeing through him earlier. What do you think everyone will do now? After the cleanup, I suppose they'll elect a new quartermaster for the dead end, Valiant said, and things will return to normal. But the rest of the Dirge are still out there, Seb pointed out. We've thwarted their plans twice now. They're going to be angrier and more dangerous than ever. Ivy had a sinking feeling that Seb was right, though she wasn't sure what the three of them could do about it. With the sack of stars destroyed, they had no way to spy on the Dirge, and she and Seb were due back to school next week anyway. I don't think their numbers have reduced as much as we think they have, Valiant said. It was in all the papers this morning. A crooked sixpence appeared at Drummond Brewster's funeral. I think Alexander's joined the Dirge. With Selena departed, Ivy supposed there was an opening in the Fallen Guild for a new wolfsbane. I think we'll see him again before this is all over, she warned. On the other side of the memorial, a tall, gray-haired gentleman came strolling toward them. His swirly, blue-green eyes were familiar. Ivy elbowed the boys. That's Mr. Punch. He came to stand beside them and nodded at the memorial. Remembering the past is not enough, of course. We must learn from it, too. What happened to Selena? Ivy said quietly. That's going to change things now, isn't it? The dead will know that in order to become one of the departed, they must unite with the uncommon object that contains the other part of their soul. She remembered what Johnny Hans had said about accepting his existence for what it was. This new information would change all that. It was going to stir things up in every undermart around the world. Mr. Punch straightened. It is a powerful revelation. Of that there is no doubt. The Dirge kept it to themselves in order to manipulate others. I hid it to prevent chaos. I see now that it was never my secret to keep. Ivy could hear the regret in his voice and considered how many other tough decisions he'd had to make over the years. How strong he was to admit his mistake, she thought. He smiled fondly down at the three of them. Can I expect to see you back in Londonor next season? Ivy shared a nervous look with Seb and Valiant. If we survive that long. They knew that the Dirge would have the three of them in their sights. They'd be wanting revenge. As if reading her mind, Mr. Punch added, You know, it isn't just the Underguard that have been monitoring you over the past few months. A few friends of mine have been keeping an eye on you too. I will ask them to stay close this summer to make sure you're safe. Also, I have something for each of you. He brought 3 objects out of his jacket pockets. A small package wrapped in black cotton, which he gave to Seb. A gold envelope, which he passed to Valian. And a heavy rectangular parcel covered in brown paper, which he deposited in Ivy's hands. For us? Ivy wasn't expecting a gift. You have proved to me that each of these is rightfully yours, Mr. Punch told them, bowing his head. Farewell and good luck. Seb unwrapped his black package. They're gloves, he said. Germer's gloves. Cool. He tried one of them on, spreading out his fingers. Valian and Ivy smirked at each other. They're a bit more than that, though, aren't they? Valian remarked. They're from a quartermaster, Ivy added, hinting. Wait, you mean I've just taken the glove? I can trade now? Ivy smiled. It's like Mr. Punch said, you've proved that they're rightfully yours. She was so proud of Seb. She recalled him riding that flying mop during the Pyroach attack, facing his fears to save everyone in the Big Top. If anyone had earned the right to take the glove and become a proper uncommoner, it was him. Valian opened the gold envelope and pulled out a card. Okay, weird. He flashed the front of the card to Ivy and Seb. It had a gold foil border and was embossed with the words, Dear Sir, you are duly invited to Forward and Rife's grand globe-trotting auction of uncommon treasures, Newbrook, Thanksgiving. Seb read it twice. I don't get it. Why has Mr. Punch given you that? Valian frowned. I don't know. It's strange, though. I've seen that company name advertised before. Your phone has a map on it, right? Yeah, here. Seb pulled it out of his pocket and tapped the screen a few times before handing it over. What is it? Valian slid his finger across the screen. Forward and Rife. Their posters were up in every undermart the sack of stars took me to when I asked it to find my sister. So, do you think Rosie has something to do with this auction? Ivy asked. It's the only thing that connects each place. Valian studied the screen. The undermarts I visited were here, here, here. He went still. You two were right. There's a pattern. They're moving from east to west along every main undermart. It's like the stops on a world tour, Seb mumbled. Or a grand globe-trotting auction, Ivy reread from the invitation. That must be why the sack of stars took you to a different place each time Rosie was traveling. Hope bloomed within her. After all these years, Valian might be on the verge of finding his sister. His eyes went glassy. That's where I have to go next, he said, pointing to New York. Newbrook Undermart. It opens over Thanksgiving. That's where I'm going to find Rosie. Seb put a hand on Valian's shoulder. That is great. American Thanksgiving is in November, right? Valian rubbed the back of his head. Yeah, but I've been waiting over 6 years. What's 6 months more? Ivy hadn't yet opened her parcel from Mr. Punch. She tore off the brown paper. Amos's journal? But why has Mr. Punch given me this? Maybe he wants you to read it, Valian suggested, passing her what was left of his flask of Raider's tonic. Here, use this. Ivy counted along to page 42 and trickled the drink down the paper. A thick white vapor began seeping out. After the fumes had dissipated, she flicked through the journal, glancing at the text on every page. There was too much information to read in one sitting. She'd have to examine the journal properly to learn what Amos knew. Perhaps that was why Mr. Punch had given it to her, so she could find out more about his work. She stopped abruptly when she spotted a short list, underlined and numbered. It's a list of the great uncommon good. Seb and Valian peered over her shoulder to read it. 1. The Stone of Dreams, Londonor. 2. The Sack of Stars, unknown. 3. The Sands of Change, Newbrook. 4. The Jar of Shadows, unknown. 5. The Sword of Wills, Montrecourt. Valian scowled. The Sword of Wills and the Sands of Change are still out there, and you can bet 5 grade that the dirge will be looking for them. Seb stretched out his fingers in his new gloves. Maybe if we can get a hold of the objects first, we might be able to hide them from the dirge, like we did with Jar of Shadows. The Sands of Change are in Newbrook, Ivy read again. The same undermart where Forward and Rife's auction is taking place. She examined Seb's phone, which was still in Valian's hand. The map had zoomed in on a long, rectangular-shaped island. Manhattan. Ivy had never been to New York. She suspected that before the year was out, that would all change. The Cabbage Moon was quiet. Most of the other guests had gone home early after the shock of what had happened at the Big Top. Feels so long ago that I was stuffing my suitcase with clothes to come here, Ivy said, cramming her pajamas inside. Seb jumped down from the top bunk, his rucksack over his shoulder. Tell me about it. These last couple of days have felt like an age. There was a knock at the door, and Judy's shiny dark bob appeared. Hey. She flashed them both an awkward smile. Thought I'd come and say goodbye before you left? Seb's face froze. Judy rolled in on her skates, head down. I bet you're desperate to get home, aren't you? Had enough of this freak show for a bit. Ivy shut her suitcase and stepped closer. I don't know about that. She was eager to see her mom and dad again, but she was going to miss her uncommon friends and the extraordinary sights of Londonor. Judy gave a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Ivy hesitated slightly before stepping forward and putting her arms around Judy. Thanks for everything you've done to help us. When they separated, Judy's eyes were shining. You're welcome, of course. Even for saving Seb's life, Ivy added, which I don't regret yet. Seb shuffled his feet, and Ivy and Judy turned toward him. He ran a hand through his hair. Does it make me any less of an idiot if I say that I'm sorry and I was a total idiot? Ivy could see the relief on Judy's face. Sounds like a riddle from the well at the world's end. They both laughed. Seb gave Judy a hug, which made her blush. All ready to go? A voice called from the hallway. Grandma Sylvie poked her head around the door. She was carrying a beautiful Persian rug, which she dragged inside. Oh, we're not flying on one of those again, are we? Seb moaned. Grandma Sylvie rubbed her hands together. What are you talking about? This carpet is top of the range, storm-resistant, temperature-controlled. It's even got autopilot and a pop-up air freshener. Judy stared at it. Wow, that can't have been cheap. Well, Grandma Sylvie winked at Ivy. 10,000 grade of uncommon objects does by the best. Ivy grinned. She'd given half her Griven's winnings to Grandma Sylvie to spend, with the understanding that Ivy and Seb were given a generous allowance every season. The other half she'd used to pay Valian back, with interest. What are your plans after we get home? Ivy asked. She assumed that Grandma Sylvie wouldn't be returning to her old life, not now that her memory had returned. She took a breath. Ethel and I are going to do what we always intended to do when we were younger. An Undermart world tour. She nudged the rug. That's why I got this. At my age, I plan to travel in luxury. Ivy scooped Scratch up from her pillow. Excited home to go, Scratches, he said, vibrating in her hand. Seb promised with the Yoda. Seb's shoulders slumped. Oh, I promised I'd let him watch Star Wars. I'll be taking a belle with no eyes to the cinema when we get back. Life is an uncommoner, hey? Star Wars, Grandma Sylvie chuckled. What? Seb said, incredulous. It's a good movie. No, it's not that. It's just that it reminds me where I sent those pyroches through the sack of stars. Where did you send them? Ivy asked. To the farthest place I could think of where they'll be able to survive, Grandma Sylvie said. Jupiter. That is the end. However, this book has an epilogue, which is kind of tells you just a little bit afterwards, after the end of the main story. Epilogue. Dr. Emmett Sparrow took another sip of coffee and put his mug down on the Keep Calm and Work in a Museum coaster on his desk. He stretched and yawned. It was getting late, and he needed to be home on time today. He'd promised his daughter Ivy that they'd finish their game of chess from the other night. She'd recently discovered a fascination with board games. He adjusted his glasses and began to remove the bubble wrap from the last object in the box. It was a piece of pottery, a vessel small enough to sit in the palm of his hand. Greek, Hellenistic period, probably. He couldn't remember seeing it before, but then this latest donation was so large. The vessel was painted pale blue, with white figures dancing around it. The design was unusual. It was shaped like a pithos jar, with a small, disc-shaped base and handles. But of course, pithos jars were huge and used for carrying grain or liquids. This one had no opening at all and was a lot smaller. He took a small plastic box from a stack on the floor beside him. Gently, he stuffed some shredded paper inside and placed the mystery pot on top. It was probably from around 150 BC, but he'd asked another expert just to be sure. He scribbled his notes down in pencil on the label. Item number 743, the Carvalho collection, pottery. 150 BC? Question mark. It would probably be included in an exhibition somewhere down the line because it was so unusual, but that wouldn't be for months, maybe even years. He stuck the label on the lid of the box and closed it tightly before grabbing his jacket and heading for the door. Ivy and that chess game were waiting. The end. Remember, there are 2 other books in the Uncommoner series. The Crooked Sixpence is the first book, if you'd like to go back and read the beginning. Of the story. And the way this one ended, I have a feeling there is going to be more to come. Thanks so much for sitting and listening with me, and we will see if there are some more books in our future over the summer. Hope you're having great days and staying healthy. Miss you. Bye.